Hello and welcome to my first ever video about the Jehovah's Witness organization. My name is Ashley Campbell and it is my newest goal to be part of the online discussion about the Jehovah's Witness teachings and to share the impact it has had on my life. As this is my first video, I think I'll start with my history within the organization, and I'm sure it will sound very familiar to any current or former JWs who are watching this, and I'll kind of bring it through until today. So I was born into the organization in the United States, in Maine in particular. My parents both had tough upbringings, especially my mother, and they both became part of the organization when they were in their 20s. I was a very good child, but I was also very lonely, and I felt isolated from the rest of the world, as the JW members are supposed to be. There were only a couple of other children in my age group in the Kingdom Hall, so I didn't have more than one or two kids to play with, and that always bothered me, and I hated not being able to associate with the children at school. That being said, I was baptized at 12 years of age, not because I actually wanted to dedicate my life to God, but because I was trying hard to please my parents and the JW community that I was a part of. I was a pretty good witness kid until the ages of around 15 to 16, when my rebellious streak set in. I stopped going to high school after sophomore year, and I started working full-time because I wanted to make enough money to leave my JW household and live on my own. I was partying and doing stupid things, but I ended up getting involved with a witness boy from another congregation when I was 17, and we were married about 6 months after we started dating, which was just after my 18th birthday. It wasn't really our idea, but our parents, and his parents especially, pushed it on us. And we had fornicated a couple of times, so we justified it in our minds, saying that it was okay that we had done so because we were to be married. Things turned very sour very quickly, unsurprisingly, and I ended up leaving him a short 9 months after being married. Going into our marriage, I had some doubts about my faith, but I was stifling the doubts, as Jehovah's Witnesses are taught to do. And for some reason, during my short marriage, I decided that I didn't care if it was the true religion. I couldn't live that way anymore, and I needed to separate myself. He and his family were not great witnesses, but they were very concerned with their appearance within the congregation, and so he was, of course, furious that he would not be allowed to remarry after we were divorced. And after a series of threats and some events that really scared my young 19-year-old self, I lied to the elders of his congregation and told them that I had cheated on him so that he would be free to remarry. And I didn't mind being disfellowshipped, but quickly after I realized that I did not want my mother to have to go through the pain associated with the stigma of having a disfellowshipped child. My dad was inactive almost my whole life, and the thought of her sitting alone at the Kingdom Hall receiving judgmental looks really chilled me to my spine, because I cared about my mother, regardless of the strict JW parent that she was, and it pained me to think like that. So I went to every meeting 3 nights a week for just over a year. This was, I believe, back in 2009, 2010, and the night that I was reinstated, I stopped going to the meetings, which made me feel empowered, and it kind of felt like I was sticking up a long-awaited middle finger to the Jehovah's Witness organization. Shortly after I stopped going, they got rid of the book study, the third meeting night, and that kind of annoyed me. But anyway, I, as of now, am not disfellowshipped to my knowledge. Since then, my mother has moved about 1,200 miles away. She's in a completely different state and congregation, and I don't really care what my standing is within the organization. So sometimes the thought crosses my mind to disassociate myself, but I have to remind myself that I don't need to play their games anymore. And the whole disfellowshipping and shunning thing is a made-up, evil game, and I feel that I would only encourage it if I were to acknowledge it. One thing that I think is important for any current Jehovah's Witness that might be watching this to know is that I did leave the organization still believing that I might be wrong and that Armageddon might come like a thief in the night. I remember laying in bed at night with a churning feeling in my stomach, And I would just feel so terrible and scared. But I was so miserable and unhappy in the organization that I thought even if I just had a few years of freedom and a chance at happiness, that I would trade that for everlasting life on a paradise earth. I thought I would live with that guilt for a long time, but I was completely wrong. It was less than 6 months after totally leaving before I realized that I was completely rid of any lingering doubts that maybe, just maybe, the witnesses were right. All of those doubts were gone, and I was free from the belief system. What I wasn't free of, though, was the misery. So one thing that the witnesses always instilled in me and its members were that, they would say, look at Johnny Doe over there. He left the organization. Now he's homeless, he's on heroin, and he has AIDS. So basically they try to say that if you leave, you will get involved in drugs, or, you'll lose everything. You will fail at life because Satan will have his grasp on you. And he will cause your life to be miserable. And there really were some examples of people not doing so hot after they left. But that is because after you leave a cult, whether it be the Jehovah's Witnesses or any other fundamentalist cult, you don't really leave everything behind mentally. You probably will have some trouble adjusting because you have been so brainwashed and you have been put through so many years of indoctrination that it has taken a toll on you as a person. And the tactics that they use to brainwash people are meant to stick with them. It is not supposed to be easy to rid yourself of what has been ingrained on your being. So for a few years in my early 20s after I left, I did what I can only describe as floundering. I was a fish out of water. I had no idea how to navigate in the real world, and I had a hard time just getting through each day. I really didn't have anyone I could relate to, and so for a few years I was in complete denial that anything bad had happened to me, that anything out of the ordinary had gone on, which as you can imagine, put me into a really dark place. The turning point and the thing that really saved me was a little group that was created on Facebook for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses from New England to connect. And I was invited by an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and as soon as I joined, I started seeing all of these posts and stories about what had happened to people as witnesses. And at the beginning it was very sad. Families being torn apart, people losing contact with loved ones, floundering as I had been. And I don't know why, but seeing those stories turned on a light inside of me. And it was like I was coming alive again. And it wasn't that I was happy to share in the misery and pain, but it was that I wasn't alone. I was not abnormal. I wasn't a wimp or a loser for having a hard time after leaving a cult. Something bad did happen to me. My childhood was not normal, and I had the right to be upset. That was the beginning of my healing process. I started doing research online, reading more stories, reading the history of the organization, and gradually things got a little better, a little bit more stable, and now I'm living a pretty good life. So whether you were ever part of the organization or not, I'm sure you can imagine that there are many more facets and grueling details to one's life story as a Jehovah's Witness, but that is the short of mine. And I've been compelled for a while now to dabble in some sort of advocacy or activism and maybe just help people that need someone to relate to or who really need to hear facts about their religion. It wasn't until I was 21 years old that I knew the Jehovah's Witnesses had predicted the end so many times, and specifically the last time being 1975. There have been more vague or less specific predictions after that, but I was never informed of that. And if I were to try to do research on the history of the organization, it would have been considered apostate literature or apostate teachings. So I have been doing a lot of research in the past few years, and especially lately I've been doing more reading and finding more books. The most recent book that I've read is I'm Perfect, You're Doomed. And this book made me laugh, it made me cry, and I could not put it down. I think it was especially relatable for me because the author's life story was eerily similar to mine. She grew up in New England as a witness. She was a gifted child who dropped out of high school, got married, and had a hard time, unsurprisingly, after that. So even if you didn't have that story, it's still a relatable book, and it brings humor to a dark subject like a fundamentalist cult. I would highly recommend it. So the next book that I plan on reading is Combating Cult Mind Control. So I heard about this through the JW podcast, which is a fabulous podcast, and I would highly recommend that as well. And I will share a review on this book once I am done reading it, which I'm sure will be great because that's all that I've heard and read about it, is that it's a great book. So I would like to continue my videos with a logical analysis of the religion and its intricate policies and falsities. But for now, thank you for watching my video. Let me know if you like it and if you'd like to hear more.